you very much and welcome this morning. My name is Bill Betten and I'm the Director of Business Solutions from Devicix, Nortech Systems. First, just a couple words of introduction, then I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm joined by some great panelists today with a variety of experiences that will lead us on this journey and talk about innovation. Talk about innovation in speed, innovation in requirements, and that sort of thing. First, what I'd like to do is put a little context around this, give a little bit of background on myself and innovation in general, turn it over to the panelists. We'll do probably a 30-minute conversation among ourselves, and then we'll save 15 minutes or so for the audience, and there should be a microphone out here. So write down your questions and have them ready. We hope that we will stimulate you this morning and get your juices flowing and get the morning off to a good start. First of all, I'm a double E and a physicist, and I built products for over 40 years for big companies like Honeywell and 3M, smaller companies like Nonin, and for the last half dozen years I've worked for a company that basically is a services company, and you'll hear a common theme among that from us today, that basically partners with people to help develop products. So my perspective as we talk about innovation pretty much comes from the perspective of building things, and most of those things have been devices of one sort or another. To set the stage for us this morning and then let the panel launch into this, I want to just throw out some ideas. There's a great book called The Myths of Innovation. For all of us who've read all the books on innovation over our careers, I found this one to be interesting because it pokes at some of the fundamental tenets, and it's by Scott Birkin. And I'm just going to throw out his quick tenets of general challenges that innovators must face, and hopefully as we go through the panel discussion today, we'll deal with some of those challenges and illuminate them. Very quickly, they're finding an idea, coming up with that initial thought and innovation that needs to be done, coming up with a solution for that idea, finding money, and in today's environment, that may be one of the most critical things of all. Great ideas going unfunded. Reproduction, meaning that we're going to be able to reproduce and recreate that one-of-a-kind innovation. Reaching out to customers, beating competitors, timing. In other words, it's always a question of do we have the right product at the right time, and above all else, keeping the lights on, which if you're a brand new innovator and in a startup, that always becomes an issue. So, wanted to set that stage for today's conversation. It's my privilege to be joined on the stage and have a brain trust here that's going to lead us through this. Rob Bodor, Vice President and General Manager of the Americas from Proto Labs. Lee Jones, the founder and CEO of Rebiotix. Ashish Kulkarni, he's the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer of Avantor Performance Materials, and Randy Nelson, the CEO and founder of Evergreen Medical Technologies. What I'd like to do now is have each of them introduce themselves, give you a little perspective on their background and their vision of innovation and how it applies to this, and then I've got a series of questions that'll take us through this journey today. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Rob to go ahead and introduce himself and give us a few thoughts.
So my name's Rob Bodor. I'm Vice President and General Manager at Proto Labs. I lead the Americas business for us. And I'm really excited to be here today and talk about innovation. Innovation is a topic that I'm very passionate about and has been something that I've been fortunate enough to be able to be involved in throughout my career. Before Proto Labs, I worked at Honeywell and several startup companies, all developing products, and with the move to Proto Labs, I kind of moved into the service side. But before that, I had the opportunity to do a lot of product development in a number of different companies with different processes around that. And so I think this is just a topic area that's really exciting, and we're seeing a lot changing in product innovation now with new technologies and new manufacturing processes becoming available. So it's a really timely to have this discussion today. So just to switch for a moment, Proto Labs, just to give you a little bit of introduction for those who don't know, Proto Labs is a contract manufacturer. We specialize in speed and a low cost of entry for kind of prototype and low volume manufacturing across 10 different manufacturing processes that we do in 3 different families of services. Which includes injection molding, CNC machining, and 3D printing. And what we've done is we've really invested a lot in developing software to automate the front end of the manufacturing process, which is what allows us to kind of do what we do. And while our name implies that we are a prototyper, and we are, what a lot of people don't realize is that most of our revenue today comes from manufacturing, production, on-demand manufacturing. You know, I'm interested in participating in this panel and talking about how Protolabs fits within innovation and how we can help customers to achieve their innovation goals. Thanks.
Lee, go ahead, Lee.
Hello, my name is Lee Jones, and I'm the founder, president, and CEO of Rebiotix. Rebiotix is a culmination for me of a long-term career in innovating. We are a company that is forging a new products in a brand new space. We develop products that are based on live microorganisms that we then package and use to treat a variety of diseases. We were the first company to take this type of product through the FDA. There were no standards, and there still are no standards. We're still the leader. We had to develop new test methods, new potency assays, a whole bunch of things associated with being an innovator in a brand new space. In my past life, I've spent probably 20 to 25 years in the first half of my career working at medical device companies. I spent a long time at Medtronic and worked in 6 different divisions, and then left the medical device arena and went to biotech for the last 10 years. So I've seen a number of different products, and my specialty really has been introducing new products and new technology to new markets. So I look forward to this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Ashish.
It's on. I think it's all turned on by this one.
All right. No? Can you guys hear me? All right. Ashish Kulkarni, I lead technology and innovation at Avantor. For those of you who don't know Avantor, we make materials that go into life sciences under NewSil brand for silicones and under JT Baker brand for materials that go into bio and pharma manufacturing. We recently announced acquisition of VWR. It's not a closed deal yet, but it's public news, so I wanted to share that with you. But prior to Avantor, I was a leader of technology and innovation, a chief technology officer at Celanese that makes materials. And before that, with United Technologies, making commercial air conditioning, something that would cool a building like this. And before that, with the American Standard, making toilets, is what I tell people. And I started my career at GE. The reason I give that background is if you look through those industries between GE, United Technologies, and Celanese, I have seen wide variety of products. And in all those cases, I was hired to drive innovation. And I stayed somewhere between 4 and 6 years to make the change. And through that span, I have learned quite a bit about what going fast means. Invariably, in most of the cases, it meant either the CEO or the president of the business wanted to make money fast through innovation. That's what I learned, and today we'll talk a lot about that concept.
Okay, Randy.
Good morning. So Randy Nelson, CEO and founder of Evergreen Medical Technologies in St. Paul. So before founding Evergreen, I had worked at Medtronic, St. Jude, Boston, the larger companies in development areas, and then founded Evergreen, which is a service company. We do engineering all the way from concept development, product development, manufacturing, and testing. So we work with a lot of startups in particular, and every one of them wants to go fast. Half of them know what that means, and half of them realize what they're asking for. So we're always looking at what does that mean for each client, and how do we do that, and maintaining the quality that we know that they need. So this is a very timely topic, and I think for a lot of startup companies, they need to take a look at how to do that, and who they work with, how do they get that done. So looking forward to the talk and your questions.
Okay, thanks very much. So as you see, we've got a panel with a variety of backgrounds and experiences. Most of us have come from large companies and worked our way down to smaller. That's always an interesting discussion in and of itself, and as that journey goes on. But we're here to talk to you today about product development, innovation and speed. And as we go through this, I'm going to ask a set of questions. We're going to have the conversation, and again, write down your questions so we can go through this a little bit more. One of the things we'd like to do initially, as we met previously and talked this through, is challenge the DeviceTalks title on this one a little bit. Speed equaling innovation. This was a topic, as Brian mentioned, was popular among engineers and being fed back because working engineers, we're continuously pushed to get things done faster, better, cheaper, et cetera. But let's start with a question. Does speed really equal innovation, and what's the impact, and how do those two equate? So we'll start with Rob. Your thoughts?
Thank you. So I think that speed does not equal innovation. I think innovation is it's a broader topic, obviously, much more involved than just going fast. Innovation is a measure of creativity, of process, of launching new products. I mean, it's multifaceted. There's a number of things involved in being a good innovator as an individual and as a corporation. So I would agree that to challenge the notion that they're equivalent, but I would say that speed is an important enabler to innovation, because iteration and testing is part of what's key to innovation, to new product development, right? Testing and evaluating your ideas. And of course, it costs resources to run every test, whether that's time or money. And if we're talking about speed, then the metric is time. To the extent that you can test more rapidly, then you can evaluate more ideas, and that leads to more innovative products, right? And that's a place where we play a lot.
Lee, your take on this, and one of the things I should have mentioned at the beginning as well is we're keeping this in the context of med device development. Obviously, speed and innovation, and we'll touch later on differences between industries, is different depending on what's driving you. Specifically in the med device world, speed and innovation are driven by factors sometimes outside of our direct control. So Lee, what are your thoughts on speed and innovation?
So I agree that speed and innovation are not necessarily one and the same thing, but if you can't innovate and expect to be the innovator if you don't recognize the need for speed. And what I found is throughout my career is that it doesn't take long, and there's competitors, and I can't tell you how many engineers that I've talked to that have said, I had that idea 5 years ago, like they had created something, but the person who took that idea and quickly got it to market or got it through prototyping was the one that actually got credit and won at the end. So I also think speed creates innovation in the sense that when you're thinking ahead and you're thinking, how can I beat that competitor? How can I get my product on the market? You do innovate. You think, I can do this, or I can do this, or I can do this. You pick your choices, and it creates kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where, as you're going quickly, you're thinking about new processes, new methods, and I think if you took time to look back on what was actually created as a result of speed, you'd probably find many of those things quite innovative.
Okay, Ashish, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my view of speed is associated with the expectation of somebody who is sitting downstream of you, because speed is driven by what the other person is expecting, whether it is your stakeholder or whether it's your customer. So if you can make a customer feel that the customer is not waiting for you to do something for them to do their job, then I think you will have a bigger impact, and you will create a perception that you're going pretty fast. So are speed and innovation related? It all depends on kind of change you're driving through innovation. If it is an incremental change that you can make somebody's life easier to do their job, then that definitely can help you catalyze at that point. But if you're trying to do something that's a game changer that requires change across the whole value chain, then of course it's not the same. But I would measure speed in terms of, are we responding at the time scale and the expectation of somebody who sits downstream of you? And I think it's possible to do both.
Okay, and Randy, why don't we finish that off with you?
So To me, here's the issue. If you're a startup company, if you're not moving fast enough, you know somebody's on your tail and likely to pass you and be first out in the market. If you don't take the time, you won't get it done right, and you won't get out in the market and have something to produce. So it's for every company, it's a different formula. But if you drive your innovation by the clock, odds are you won't get there at all. And that's what ends up the discrepancy, whether you're the investor saying move faster, and you've got about 3 or 4 different concepts and you're trying to figure out which one to move forward with. It takes time, and you've got to take that time to be able to get the right one to move forward, but you've always got somebody on your heels. And I worked at a company in the mid-90s where we had, at one point, we had the most advanced implantable defibrillator in development. By the time we were out, it was second, and we couldn't even market it because the big companies had come out and beat us in the market. So the time was really critical, and we were moving at what we thought was as fast as possible, but in the end, it didn't matter. So that's the conundrum with medical devices, and everybody looks at, Bill talked about it, compared to cell phone apps, computer apps. Those can drive really fast, and that's what's driving the investment market, even for us in medical devices, but it's not the same formula.
Okay, we started talking with us on speed, so in 1 or 2 words, and we'll do this quick because I want to get into the architecture of companies and projects and actual learnings of what we can do to improve innovation. I use the speed word as well. So in 1 or 2 words, how do you measure innovation in the medical context specifically? And Lee, we'll start with you. So give me we've touched on speed and money, but go ahead.
So I've always looked at it as the unmet medical need. So can we solve that unmet medical need? Because if it's unmet, clearly there's innovation that's required to get there. So most of my work has been focused on finding those unmet medical needs and then working on that.
Okay, Ashish, 1 or 2 words. How do you measure innovation?
It's return on investment and solving a customer problem.
Okay, Randy.
I'm not going to say really anything different. It's what makes a difference to the patient. What can make a difference to the patient?
Okay, and Rob.
Yeah, I would build upon Randy's points around it's about patience and efficacy, I think is what's critical.
Okay, very good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the organizational structure. We've all been part of big and small companies. We've seen lots of different organizations. There's an innovative book of the month club, I think, that we've all read and looked at. How does the development structure and processes that you've seen, and even your company organizations, impact innovation? Today we hear a lot about agile programming, and that's much like rapid prototyping was back in the early days of electronics, and let's fail fast. And I always hate that word. I always prefer let's succeed quickly as opposed to failing fast. But so from your perspective, organizationally, the development structure and process, how have you seen those things impacting innovation, and what are some best practices that you've seen? Ashish, could you start with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. At least from my perspective, for any model to work, the clarity of goals on what you're trying to accomplish is very important. What does your company expect? What does your business leader expect? What does your president expect or CEO expects? Once you have that clarity of goals, there are 2 kinds of activities in my view when you're doing innovation. There is one where I call integration activity, where things need to pass between functions where you want to have the least amount of waiting time. And another is functional activity, which is every function needs to do a certain kind of work that they need to have clarity as well as competency to do it. And if you staff your organization with the right metrics and have people who can do integration work well, and then the people who can do functional activity well across all functions, I think you can go pretty fast.
Okay, Randy, what are your thoughts on organizational structures?
Well, it used to be vertical integration was the big success on how to move faster and get things done more efficiently. And I think that's changed, so especially, and it doesn't matter actually whether it's a startup or a larger company. What I see more is what I call source integration, where teams will be formed not necessarily wholly within a company, but they'll go find the experts, whether they're within your company, whether they're outside of the company, to make that most effective team and organizational structure so that you can move effectively and therefore quicker than just putting together people within one company.
Okay. Rob, let's build on that because let's still focus on the organizational piece. Obviously, Proto Labs, and I'll admit we're a client of yours as well, so we use your
Thank you.
services to help develop things as well. So in particular, with your company's ability to become part of a team, talk about that organizational structure and build on Randy's thought a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think you ask about structure. To me, it's not strictly about structure. It's about how the team works together cross-functionally. It's about communication, iteration, testing, and validation across many, many stakeholders repeatedly. And so, you asked about, like, you think about agile kinds of technology development, right? And in manufacturing today, I think with some of these expectations around speed and the ability to collaborate are changing. We've got, we talk about the digital thread and digital manufacturing as a way to connect all the different suppliers and partners throughout the ecosystem, as well as be able to trace from, initial concept design through the manufacturing process and ultimately into validation. And I think that these kind of macro trends that are going on enable you to kind of build a broader ecosystem like, many of the people on this panel here to participate and to really create, value outside of the organization as well as inside.
Lee, with your focus right now as the pure product development person on the panel, as opposed to the service organizations, can you comment on, from an organizational and structural point of view, and your use of partnerships, and how you view innovation as you're developing that new product, and from a structural and project point of view?
Actually, in this case, I really agree with Randy. One of the things that, in my past history, it used to be quite vertical, and you'd wait until the one in front of you handed it over and there wasn't a lot of interaction. In our company, it's totally opposite. We staff people and have them slide from one activity to another, so they're taking the knowledge with them. We work a lot with outside vendors, and at times where we need that set of expertise, so we can't wait to take the time to build it within our company. We go find it and then collaborate. And what I found has been really useful is all those people bring a different perspective, and a tidbit here, a tidbit there, a little thing that they might say really has added speed and innovation to what we've done. So I totally agree. I think having flexible groups that have execution ability. I think the one other thing I'd mention is that we have a lot of discussions about when is good enough, because you can keep iterating and iterating and iterating without actually accomplishing something. So we have a lot of discussion around the table about, is this good enough? Is this good enough to do this now? Can we change it later? Can we, what's it going to take?
Okay, and let's follow up on that theme, and we'll start with Randy on this one, because I think Ashish mentioned it, it's having clear goal and having that in mind when you're doing that. So we all have been involved in product definitions in the fuzzy front end, and so what can we do at that part? It's establishing goals, it's looking at putting a team together, it's doing that. What are some tips and things that you guys have learned throughout your careers in terms of speeding up that front end definition of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it? Randy, any thoughts on that?
So at Evergreen, one of the most important starting points for us is setting up requirement documents. And with all our early stage concept development, structurally you don't need to do that by ISO and design controls. But that's where we start to make sure that we're communicating as well as possible with our clients, understanding what they need, they're understanding what can be done. So getting those requirements in place as thoroughly as possible, knowing that they're going to change all the way through. But that really helps us set the stage for knowing what the next step is and making sure we're on the right track.
So Rob, let's follow up on that. So we all agree, and in the medical community, we're driven by having a requirements document that we're going to follow through, traceability and all of that. What secrets have you learned for helping your clients get those requirements defined up front? Anything, what methodology do you use, and how do you get them to the table to talk?
Yeah, so within our organization, we've really focused on the concept of a minimum viable product whenever we do new innovation. I'm seeing heads nod, so that's good. Others are doing this as well, and I think what's critical to that is the upfront communication and alignment around that definition. What is going to be good enough for us to take it to market and launch within our own services, and then for our customers, how do we fit into that definition for them? And oftentimes it translates to a test and learn kind of process that we test against that, that minimum viable feature set, and then iterate to that. If you don't have that definition clear and all the stakeholders kind of bought in, then I think you're right. Then you can iterate indefinitely and kind of never get there. So I think that's pretty critical.
Lee, any magic out of your discussion, and
No, I don't
anything
think
you
so.
want to add? Ashish?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to Rob's point is if you have to do the concept of Agile/Scrum model where you go with minimum viable product, you need a willing and a partnering customer. So that is a very critical aspect of driving innovation. Having a first few customers who are willing to partner with you, who are willing to try your minimum viable product and give you feedback is absolutely critical. The industries that I have been part of, it's very rare that customers know everything that they need upfront. Until they try, they wouldn't know. So, and it gets iterated. So having that willing customer to work with and you respond at a speed that they expect will definitely get you feedback faster and make it go well.
Yeah, I think that you hit on it exactly, and that's this test and learn concept is really about that, right? It's often not, it's often difficult for the customer to really know the details of what they're looking for until they have something tangible to react to.
Exactly.
I'm going to take us down a slightly different tack now. Let's talk about innovation in the medical world and innovation or being a fast follower. And I specifically want to put in the context. I mean, most of us are from Minnesota, and we're blessed with a very robust economy here, particularly large medical firms, as well as a lot of new startups and that sort of thing. But if we look globally, we see that the big fish are swallowing the smaller fish and that sort of thing. I'd like to have Rob perhaps start with a conversation on is innovation limited or declining in large companies as opposed to small companies, and where do we see that being fostered in today's environment?
Well, that's a great question. We don't see it as declining. I think in medical device, for a long time, there was a lot of innovation, in the small, in smaller companies and startups have been a big engine for innovation, particularly in the Twin Cities area. We see a lot of that, though we certainly see innovation in the large multinationals as well. In medical device specifically, if I look across industries and the industries that we serve, what we find is that by industry it varies, right? In some industries, the dynamics of the industry, drive it more where innovation is held by the multinationals, and in others it's more tends to be in the smaller companies who are driving innovation, and there's more of an M&A model around innovation. So it really depends, I think, on the industry.
Lee, same question, and from your perspective, as a relatively small startup company building something new and innovative, I'll pose it slightly differently. Could you have done that in a big company, and what drove you to the small company, and how are you looking at innovation in your space?
Again, I think it depends on the company. I spent a lot of time at Medtronic in my early career working in the ventures area, so I worked on multiple different products that were outside of the normal part of the company. And that, because we had a budget and we had people, we moved pretty quickly. I like the small company culture. It's a different culture, so that's where I found myself. I like the ability to make decisions quickly, not having to go through a big hierarchy. And what I'm finding is that we're attracting employees that like that same type of thing. So I don't know that, all innovation happens in small companies. I think we're uniquely geared towards going fast and making decisions quickly because of the small number of people that we have, and that's appealing to a lot of people.
Okay, Ashish, kind of the same issue. Big company, small company, how do you see the dynamics in the interplay?
This is my first small company. Now we are about to become big. But I have worked predominantly in big companies, whether you take GE or United Technologies. But what I believe, I don't want to answer whether big companies can innovate or not. That's probably not what my place is or my expertise is. But what I can say is I do see the world evolving into two bimodal sort of distribution, two different distributions. One is any innovation that requires a huge amount of incubation time and game-changing stuff that requires a lot of validation. I believe that is probably done better in startups and smaller companies because of the patience. And then the bigger companies, because of their customer reach and the scale that they have, can take that technology and scale it up and drive bigger financial results. So that model, if it works out, depending on your interest, can create pretty good opportunities for people, but also drive innovation in two buckets, is how I see things evolving.
Mm-hmm. Randy, can you comment on that a little bit with the bimodal distribution and looking at what I'll capture as perhaps the initial innovation, the small company, but driving it to market and doing that. And perhaps that mirrors what we're seeing in the economic community of the big fish swallowing the small fish. Can you comment on that and build on Ashish's idea?
Yeah. But I've seen something similar. I think this has been happening for the last, to my knowledge, I'll go back to early 90s when I used to work for a company that was owned by Eli Lilly, who came out with a statement said, we're going to start buying our research. Their internal research department didn't like that very much, but that was when I started seeing the change, larger companies looking outside to reduce the risk, putting the risk on the shoulders of the startup companies, and then buying that. And that's been more the trend over the years. There was another company, it's about the same time period, that internally the group of people had an idea, the company did not want to pursue it. These people left, started their own company, became successful, and the company they used to work for bought that company at multiples of what they would have paid. But they let these startup people take that risk and potentially fail. But to me, startup people are much more driven to be successful because they've got everything on the line.
I want to make sure we save time for audience participation here in just a minute, so I'm going to kind of bring us back to a couple of things, and then I'll open the floor for questions here. I do want to talk about it. We touched on it, the investment community. Last week I was in Boston attending a session on investment folks, and they want everything de-risked. And so the question is, let's make this one a brief response as much as we can on the investment community and what you're seeing and observing in that arena on the de-risking. And Lee, why don't you go ahead and jump on that one?
So it is very interesting in terms of where the money flows. What I found is that the venture capital groups and the investors really are not risk takers at all. And this gets back to they want everything de-risked. They want it to look, smell, taste like everything they've done before because they've developed a model that works for them. Each group has their own ideas. Where they really struggle is anything that's new or innovative because it doesn't have a model that they can follow where they can see it through to the end. So I think it's getting more difficult to get money for new items. If there's a clear pathway to an exit, then those are the types of things. If it looks like something they've done before and they've been successful, that's where the money tends to go. So I think it's not what I expected coming out in a brand new field that's kind of a hot technology these days. But I think de-risking really is the key, and what is risk in terms of each individual has their own tolerance for that.
Okay. Any of the panelists have anything they want to add to that? Because I do want to take us to another question, but anybody have anything they want to add to the investment community discussion?
You're ahead of me on that one, so.
But
Go ahead,
I
Rob.
can
Oh.
I can add one thought. We are owned by private equity. We are not venture capital owned, and I believe in our world in private equity, the de-risking concept shows up as faster returns. Is what it shows up as. So if you think about it as a portfolio game where you can drive innovation at faster or different time scales and different scopes of projects. So if you have a basket where you can show short-term results and follow that up with medium to long-term, I think you have a better chance of success to keep their confidence in innovation.
Okay. I'm going to ask, Rob, did you have something you want to comment on that?
I would just add that from our perspective, I think it seems like the seed round is the one that is often the most challenging for companies today, because the expectation on returns and the time frame of those, and the expectation of kind of where the company is at the time when they even receive that first venture round seems to have risen, and so a lot of our customers who are early stage startups, and we give free manufacturing to some of them based on a contest that we run. They seem to be struggling for that first seed funding. Is that similar to what you're seeing? Yeah.
Okay. You can't have a discussion on innovation without bringing in the 2 R's in the medical world, and we're going to start with Randy on this one. Regulatory and reimbursement. So what impact does that have? And I know that's a topic for a full day, so we'll make this one brief and it'll lead us into Q&A with the audience. But regulatory and reimbursement, how does that impact innovation? Randy, go ahead. We'll let you start.
I think it drives a lot of innovation, one way or the other. So if you don't meet your regulatory requirements and don't think about those while you're thinking of what that innovation is, you're going to slow things up and you're going to miss the mark. Regulatory and reimbursement come in play more and more, and as an important part of what that end innovation can achieve.
Okay, Ashish, we'll work back this way. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I cannot talk reimbursement. I don't have any knowledge of that. But in terms of regulatory element, no matter what industry you are in, every industry has some level of regulatory work that you need to do, probably more intense in the medical world. But I would say if there is a cross-functional right process to take care of those requirements early on, you can probably go through very fast in the process. Second aspect is innovation can also be a way in which you can influence regulatory activities from what I have seen in other industries, and there is a way to think through that. So I would say it's a two-way street. Innovation does affect regulations in a way, and regulations can affect the way you do innovation. And if you figure out that two-way street effectively with right expertise on the team, it can really help innovation.
Okay, Lee.
I've found that not just in products, but also there's innovation in regulatory.
Correct.
And so it isn't, I think the topic here, originally was geared towards more on the engineering side and product development, but I think there's innovation across the field, including reimbursement and how you think about your products and how you can get them reimbursed.
Okay, and Rob.
So I think that regulation is obviously a strong influencer of innovation and the innovation process in all fields, particularly in medical device. For us, the way we see it is I think it pushes our customers to prototype early and to prototype in the final manufacturing process, say injection molding, right away. So that benefits our business. It also drives kind of our quality systems and our traceability as we think about how we serve those customers.
Okay. Well, why don't we open it up for the audience here? I believe someone has a microphone around here, but if you raise your hand and we'll get the mic around, otherwise project loudly and we'll repeat it here. But we'll now entertain some questions from the audience for our panelists, and I'll challenge the panelists to also think about, as we're going through this, what their final key takeaway thought. So we'll do questions and answers for about the next 10 minutes, and then we'll have the panelists summarize their thoughts on this at the end in one key takeaway from them and their perspective. So, audience members, questions, comments? There's one over here. Yes, Heather, thank you.
Hi, Kathy Sherwood with Boston Scientific. I do reimbursement. So I'd like to follow up on that last topic a little bit. You know, I've worked in a couple of startup companies, and we didn't think much about reimbursement. But when it came to going out and getting your next round of funding, all of a sudden it became really, really important, because obviously the valuation of that company is highly dependent on the ability to commercialize. So, and I also know, and we'll be talking about this on a panel this afternoon, the delta between regulatory requirements for clinical evidence and reimbursement, not just Medicare, but even the American Medical Association to get codes, is dramatically, it's just massive. I mean, there's major misalignment in a lot of cases. So to what extent do you guys feel, as you're innovating, that your investors are really thinking about that putting a fine point on that commercialization through the vehicle of reimbursement?
Who'd like to handle that? Lee?
I
Go
can
ahead.
take that one. I don't think it's up to the investors to decide that or to even ask that question. It's really up to the company. So, you know, one of the things that we did at Rebiotix early, in fact, from my medical device experience, I knew that if the product couldn't be used by the physician easily, I mean, kind of being useful to the patient is a gimme these days, right? It has to work. But if it can't be used in the physician's general practice, they can't make money on it, it's not going to fly. So early on, I mean, before the investors even talked to investors, that plan was already in place.
That's great.
And that's how we've developed and innovated our product around that endpoint that we knew would be 5 to 7 to 10 years later. So, you know, you're kind of taking a shot in the dark because you're thinking about the medical system and how it's going to intersect your product and the trends. And, you know, again, that was all planned in early on.
Okay, great.
Another question. Back behind you, Heather.
So I'm going to follow up on the regulatory side. How do you balance innovation and quality? What I mean is, it's easy to incentivize somebody, your launch date is X. This is where your bonus comes in. But what about preventing a recall in 6 months? I mean, how do you incentivize that?
Who wants to tackle that one? Innovation and quality, speed and quality. Go ahead, Rob.
So for us and for many of our customers, we try and tackle that through not making such a differentiation between kind of the prototyping and the early stages and the production process, right? So for most of our services, the manufacturing process doesn't vary, whether, you know, regardless of what stage you are in the NPI process, going straight to the production technologies right away, and therefore you're using those production systems. You're using the same quality and validation processes and measurement systems that you would use for the final product, and thereby having more assurance that, you know, you've got the quality that you need early on, right? And you can test and iterate and change the design if need be. If you're not finding that to be the case, do your statistical testing and so on early on.
And if I could add to that too, and while we're getting the next question going, it's why I react so hard to fail fast. And I ran an agile programming group at a small company called 3M once upon a time. And it was in the early days of agile, and it became a question of how do we make sure that we're not using speed as another way of being sloppy, whether it's code writing or doing hardware development and that sort of thing. And part of that is discipline. It's by having clear expectations. It's back to setting the minimum viable product. How good is good enough? That was mentioned as well by the panel. So making sure you understand what the objective is for that round of hardware, software, chemistry, whatever it is you happen to be building, and understanding that and being clear about that is absolutely critical to avoid falling into the trap of getting there quickly. And we could have a fun conversation around software companies that have launched products and let the consumer basically be their quality control. Another question, please. while we're waiting for you to think of some more questions,
Actually, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead,
for you.
Heather. Sorry.
There's so many companies in this industry. What percentage of the companies do you think are really embracing the innovative challenge and doing things right from the beginning? Some of the things that you had talked about earlier is having that not quite so vertical approach. Do you have any insight into who's really doing it well, who's, maybe making steps toward that, and do you think the medical device industry is actually embracing these lessons?
Okay, so vertical versus a more collaborative, cooperative environment, and many of us up here represent that cooperative, collaborative, so you may have a slight bias, but go ahead, panelists, who'd like to tackle that one? Randy, go ahead.
So I missed part of it, but in context.
It's really, as I understand it, a question of how many companies are really embracing the collaborative environment as
yeah.
opposed to keeping it internal and trying to do it all themselves.
Yeah. So two categories. Startups are more and more being virtual than ever. It used to be startups that would build up more of a bricks and mortar, hire a lot of employees. More today, it's staying really virtual. We have some of our clients, they meet in our room, in our conference room. Otherwise, they work out of their homes. Because the last thing their investors want to do is build up a big enterprise that they need to sell off. So the large companies are also going outside more than ever before because they realize they can get things done less expensive, quicker, speed to market, and get things done at an equal quality level. As an example, I was talking to a big company a while ago, and we were talking to them about our, paperwork's a big deal, and it just in speed. We've got internally a 3-day turnaround time in getting documents signed and released. And so I was talking to one of the big companies, and they said, it takes them 3 months. I said, we can finish a project in that time. So they realized that by going outside, that they can be much more efficient with what they're doing with the resources that they've got internally. And there's a whole world of outside resources that can get things done, in a lot of cases, better and less costly. So what they need to do is sell.
And we see the same thing because we are a materials company. We see across the board between pharma and device companies doing more and more contract work. And so there's quite a bit of this collaborative model going on across, some to more extent than the others, but we see it across the whole spectrum.
And if I could just add, I was at a major medical manufacturer last week out in the Boston area, and we had met their VP about 9 months ago, and he came in from the outside and he said, we're going to outsource everything. Not quite everything, but we're going to outsource, we're going to outsource, we're going to outsource. And after that initial flurry, I was there last week and I talked to his direct reports, and their comment was, well, he found it wasn't quite as easy to outsource everything as he had hoped. And it's what I call corporate antibodies. Sooner or later, if there's an idea inside, sometimes the corporate antibodies kind of take care of that infection that's setting in and that sort of thing. The key was, though, he was committed to it. Other questions from the audience? We have about 5 minutes left back here. While you're walking the microphone back, I'm going to pose one for Ashish. In our conversation before this, you talked about lessons learned from other industries, and some of us have come from other industries. Do you want to comment real quickly on lessons learned and what we can bring into the medical world from other industries?
So I divide all my learning into sort of 3 buckets. First one is I learned from multiple places that incremental is okay. It pays the bills, right? So that, I think, is very important. You don't always have to think about a game-changing innovation. That's number 1. Number 2, a willing customer who is willing to partner with you. Keep looking for that. That is a very important enabler for innovation as we do activities. And third is this contemporary practice of Scrum and Agile. I think for our world, it could be very beneficial in the sense a lot of processes have been set up sequential and waterfall model. By going through the Scrum and Sprint concepts, I think you can reduce a lot of time and really create a lot of value for the customers.
Okay, we have one last question from the audience back here. Then I'm going to ask you for your key takeaways, and we'll close on time. So go ahead.
Hi, JC Weigelt with Abbott. Thank you so much for your insight thus far. I look at the word innovation and I obviously think clinical effectiveness. I want to know if you have any insight into cost effectiveness. It seems like it's a big touch point with hospitals these days with readmission penalties, accountable care organizations, and maybe how you think about cost effectiveness with new devices as innovation and bringing that forward.
Lee, why don't you start with that one? Go ahead.
So cost effectiveness, to me, is you have to build that in. There's not even a question. The question really gets to be, how do you measure that? How do you know what you're going to end up with at the end? What we've done at our company is really looked at the cost of care, what it takes to manage that particular patient with that particular problem, and can we bring something to the market that's going to save either that patient or the healthcare system some money. And if we can do that in a multiple, let's say it costs $20,000 and we can bring our product so that the healthcare organization gets 2 times their money out of it, for example, costs them half as much, then we think we've done a good job. So I think that the question really gets to be, how do you measure what you aim at? And I think that just has to be built in these days anyway.
Okay, Rob, go ahead and you touch on it, and then I'm going to hit the key takeaways from the audience or from our panel. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think when I think about the cost of innovation, kind of think about it 2 ways. One is the cost associated with the spend on any particular program, right, within the R&D. And then there's the risk, right, and the associated cost of either mitigating that risk or dealing with the risk if you haven't mitigated it properly. So I think that, and those are the things that you balance, right, when you think about spending on innovation and managing cost, right? You obviously have to mitigate the risk, make sure that you have an effective product, but you also want to minimize your upfront cost associated with that. And so I think finding the right balance between those two is really what's critical. And I think that we're in a time now where there's a lot of advancements in manufacturing and digital technologies that help to do that, because the cost of testing and doing, some initial validations and taking risk down or less through 3D printing, digital simulation, some of the manufacturing processes that are digital manufacturing and others allow for that to be easier, and you have to invest less than you had to, 5-10 years ago in order to reduce your risk profile.
Okay, let's do key takeaways. Your final thoughts, say 10 words or less, your key takeaway for the audience on innovation. Randy, you go first.
Boy. 10
Thank
words?
you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just use 2 of them. Speed is not necessarily the answer to good innovation or getting a product to market. It's getting the requirements and taking the time and making sure you get the right expertise to get the job done.
Okay, Ashish.
Yeah, go back to the points I made, which is have clarity of goals on what you want your innovation program to do. Minimize the wait time in the whole process, which requires you to have a willing customer and a collaborative supplier. Use the whole value chain to make things happen.
Okay, Lee.
And I think that innovation isn't confined just to the product. It can be the whole process. Like we talked about today, the paperwork or things around that, regulatory, all those things add up and ultimately add to the speed that you can bring something to the market.
Okay, and Rob.
I would say that speed enables innovation, and that's really tied to, speed is relative, right? It's really tied to the expectations of what normal is, and therefore what are you going faster than? And I would just highlight again that there's a lot of change right now, and leadership expectations around what speed is should be changing. For example, we can make injection molds in 1 to 15 days, so, and that's just one example of the kind of digital manufacturing processes and how that enables, different perspectives on speed. So I would say, challenge that and really understand it to make sure that you're enabling the innovation.
Okay. Well, if I could hopefully tie it all together here, one of the things we heard are clear goals, collaboration. We heard collaboration probably more clearly than I have in a long time, knowing when you're done and putting it together. I'd like to just encapsulate that all together with a final thought on having a good plan. You wouldn't believe how often that is overlooked. We see brand new startups, two-person virtual companies like Randy does, all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. And one of the critical issues we found, particularly when you're going back to venture capitalists and doing that, is showing up with a good plan that shows, here's our path from A to Z. And sometimes Z is first in an animal, maybe first in human, it may be all the way to production. But have a clear plan in place, work with your partners and collaborators, put that out there, and you'll know what you're tracking towards. So please join me in thanking our panelists. I know we'll be around and happy to answer some other questions at the break and other things, but thank you very much.